My mother only begged me for one thing before she died. Not money, not forgiveness, not even to stay strong. She looked straight at me, her voice barely above a whisper, and said, "Whatever happens, never open that door. Promise me." It wasn't a suggestion, it was fear. My mother was not a dramatic woman. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't control. For most of my life, she was calm, practical, and painfully honest. So when she warned me about that door, the one at the back of the old property she never talked about, I knew it mattered. I promised her I wouldn't open it. 2 weeks later, she was gone. After the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming, after the house grew quiet in a way I'd never known before, that promise began to feel heavier than grief itself. Because grief makes you ask questions, and the worst questions are always the ones your parents never answered. The door was still there, locked, dusty, untouched. And the more I tried to respect my mother's wishes, the more I felt like she had taken something with her to the grave. Something unfinished, something dangerous. I truly believed opening that door might help me understand her, might help me heal. I had no idea it would awaken people who had been silent for years. No idea it would turn my own family against each other. And no idea it would reveal a truth my mother had spent her entire life protecting me from. If you've ever lost a parent and wondered what they never told you, if you've ever felt like your family history hides something darker than you were meant to see, you may want to stay with me until the end of this story. And before we go any further, if you don't want to lose this story, when life pulls you away, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. These stories are told slowly, honestly, and they're meant to be listened to all the way through. Let me ask you something. If the person who loved you most warned you never to look behind one door, would you obey them forever? Or would curiosity eventually win? Because when I finally opened that door, I understood exactly why my mother was afraid. And what I found there, I won't explain just yet. Not because I don't want to, but because once you know it, there's no closing that door again. The funeral was small. That was exactly how my mother would have wanted it. No long speeches, no dramatic music, just a quiet room, a few chairs filled with people who knew her as kind, reserved, and private. Those were the words everyone used. But as I stood there, listening to condolences that felt rehearsed and distant, I realized something unsettling. No one really knew my mother. Not completely. After the service, people hugged me, told me she was at peace now, and promised to call. Most of them didn't. Within a week, the house felt hollow in a way grief books never prepare you for. Not sad exactly, just empty. I began sorting through her things because I didn't know what else to do. Old sweaters, receipts folded carefully into envelopes, a kitchen drawer full of batteries she never threw away just in case. Everything about her life was practical, controlled, intentional. That's why the letter from her attorney surprised me. I didn't even know she had an attorney. The office was modest. No glass walls or city views. Just a middle-aged man with tired eyes who spoke gently, like he'd done this too many times before. He slid a thin envelope across the desk. "This was your mother's," he said. "She asked that you receive it only after her passing." Inside was a short letter written in her familiar handwriting. No poetry, no long explanations, just a few lines. "My dear child, if you're reading this, then I've left you sooner than I hoped. There are things I couldn't explain while I was alive. Some truths protect better when they remain quiet. Please remember what I asked of you, and trust that everything I did for you." That was it. No explanation, no apology. Just another reminder of the door. The attorney cleared his throat. "There's also a property matter," he said almost casually. "A small holding your mother kept in her name. It's now Legally, yours. I frowned. My mother didn't own any property. He nodded like he'd expected that response. She never lived there, he said. But she paid taxes on it for years. Always on time, always quietly. He handed me a key. Old, heavy, with a tag that had no address. Just a number. And one more thing, he added. She specifically instructed that the property not be sold for at least 12 months. No exceptions. I felt a tightness in my chest. Why? He shrugged gently. She didn't say, only that it mattered. Driving home, the questions wouldn't leave me alone. Why keep land she never used? Why hide it from me? Why forbid me from opening that door? Yet leave everything else behind, so carefully. That night, I called my aunt, my mother's sister. She answered on the third ring. When I mentioned the property, there was a pause. Not confusion. Recognition. That old place, she said finally. I didn't think she still had that. What place, I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. That's not something you should dig into, she said. Your mother had her reasons. I felt a familiar frustration rise in my chest. The kind I'd felt my whole life, when adults decided silence was the same thing as protection. She's gone, I said quietly. I deserve to know. My aunt sighed. Knowing doesn't always help, she replied. Sometimes it just makes things harder. Before I could ask anything else, she changed the subject. And when I pressed again later, she didn't answer at all. That was the moment I understood something important. The door wasn't just a door. It was a boundary, one my mother had built, not only to keep me out, but to keep something else from reaching me. And whatever it was still waiting. I waited 3 days before going there, not because I was busy, but because every instinct in me said I wasn't ready. The property sat at the edge of a small town my mother never mentioned. No photos, no stories, just a name, buried in paperwork, and an old key that felt heavier every time I touched it. When I finally drove there, I almost laughed. This was what she was afraid of. A modest weathered building tucked behind a row of neglected trees. No gates, no warning signs, no sense of danger at all. It didn't look like a secret. It looked forgotten. I parked and sat in the car longer than I needed to, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. I could still hear my mother's voice in my head. Never open that door. I told myself I wasn't breaking the promise yet. I was just looking. The outside of the building was plain, paint peeling, windows dusty but intact. Nothing about it suggested money or crime or scandal. If anything, it felt sad. That's what unsettled me the most. I unlocked the outer door easily. Too easily. Inside was another door. This one was different. Heavier, thicker, recently reinforced. The door she warned me about. I rested my hand against it and felt something I hadn't expected. Cold. Not the temperature. The feeling. Like the air itself didn't want me there. I stepped back. I could still leave. No one knew I was there. No one was watching. I thought about my promise, about her last days, about how calm she'd been, even as she grew weaker. Fear wasn't something my mother showed lightly, but silence had shaped my entire relationship with her. And I was tired of inheriting questions instead of answers. I unlocked the door. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Inside the room was small, windowless, clean in a way that felt deliberate. No furniture, just shelves, boxes, folders, neatly labeled. This wasn't a hiding place. It was an archive. I picked up the first folder and froze. My mother's handwriting stared back at me. Careful, precise. Dates, names, some familiar. Some I hadn't heard in years. Some I had never heard at all. Photographs spilled from one box. Not family photos. Documents. Old IDs letters addressed to someone who looked like my mother, but wasn't named the same. My chest tightened. This wasn't about money. It was about identity. I flipped through page after page, my hands beginning to shake. My mother hadn't just lived quietly. She had lived carefully. There were legal papers, name change records, proof of residence in another state, under another name. I sat on the floor, surrounded by fragments of a life I never knew existed. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to close the box, to lock the door, to walk away. But it was too late, because now I understood why she had been afraid. This wasn't a secret that stayed buried. This was a secret that could wake people up. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A message from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. "I heard you're sorting through your mom's things. We should talk." I stared at the screen. I hadn't told anyone where I was, or what I'd found. Yet somehow, they knew. I locked the door behind me when I left. Not to keep myself out, but to keep something else from getting in. Because whatever my mother had hidden here, it wasn't finished with us yet. By the time I got home, my phone had 3 missed calls. All from people who hadn't checked on my mother once during her illness. A cousin, an uncle, someone listed in my contacts as do not answer. For reasons I'd almost forgotten, I didn't return any of the calls. Not yet. I needed time to think. But time was not something my family intended to give me. The next morning, my aunt showed up unannounced. She stood on my porch with a tight smile and a grocery bag in her hands, like we were still pretending this was a normal visit. "I was in the neighborhood," she said. She wasn't. She sat at my kitchen table, looking around, slowly, taking inventory. Her eyes lingered too long on the paperwork stacked neatly beside my laptop. "You went to the property," she said casually. It wasn't a question. I felt a chill move through me. "Yes," I replied, "I did." She exhaled sharply and shook her head. "I warned your mother this would happen." That was the first crack. "What would happen?" I asked. She hesitated. "Just long enough. People start remembering things," she said. "Things that are better left alone." Before I could press her, my phone rang again. This time I answered. It was my cousin. His voice was warm, almost rehearsed. "We're just worried about you," he said. "You shouldn't have to handle everything alone." I thanked him politely and ended the call. 2 hours later, he sent a follow-up message. "I heard the property might be worth something now." There it was. The concern wasn't about me or my mother. It was about value. By the end of the week, the messages became more direct. Suggestions, advice, pressure disguised as help. One relative suggested I sell quickly before things get complicated. Another warned me that family disagreements can get ugly. And then someone said something that made my stomach drop. "You know," they wrote, "your mother didn't leave that place to you by accident." I sat with that sentence for a long time because it carried an implication I didn't want to face. They knew. Not everything, but enough. That night, I went back to the property. I needed to see it again with clearer eyes. Standing in that small room, surrounded by files my mother had curated, like a life raft, I understood something I'd missed before. She wasn't hiding from strangers. She was hiding from family. Names appeared again and again in the documents. People I knew, people who laughed at holiday dinners, people who hugged me at the funeral. And suddenly, the silence made sense. I remembered arguments whispered behind closed doors when I was a child. The way my mother would stiffen when certain names came up. How she always insisted on leaving gatherings early. She hadn't been antisocial. She had been cautious. I took photos of everything, every document, every label, because a quiet fear had begun to settle in my chest. The kind that tells you someone else is already planning their next move. The next morning, my cousin called again. This time, I let it go to voicemail. His message was different, less friendly. "We need to talk. As a family. There are things you don't understand yet." That sentence echoed in my head. Because I understood enough to know this wasn't about protecting me. It was about controlling the story. Later that afternoon, I received an email from a lawyer I didn't recognize, representing interested parties, requesting a meeting. My hands shook as I closed the laptop. My mother hadn't just hidden a secret. She had anticipated this moment. The calls, the pressure, the sudden concern from people who had stayed away for years. She had known exactly who would come knocking, once that door was opened, and she had trusted me to decide what to do next. The question was no longer whether I should have opened the door. The question was whether I was ready to finish what she started, because whatever my family wanted from me, they weren't getting it quietly. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's handwriting. Careful, deliberate, like someone who knew time was limited and mistakes were not an option. The next morning, I went back to the room behind the door. This time, I didn't rush. I sat at the small folding table my mother had left there, placed the folders in front of me, and began reading from the beginning. Not the end, not the most dramatic parts. The beginning, because that's where the truth usually hides. The first entries were dated decades ago. Before I was born, my mother wrote about leaving home suddenly, not running away, escaping. She described a household ruled by fear, not love, by silence enforced, not chosen. There were mentions of money that didn't belong to the family, accounts opened in names that weren't real, promises made to keep everyone quiet. And then came the line that made my breath catch. If I stay, my child will grow up learning that this is normal. That was it. That was the moment she decided to disappear. She changed her name, moved states, cut contact, not because she wanted a new life, but because she wanted a clean one. Page after page, she documented what she'd witnessed. Financial manipulation, threats disguised as concern, people protected because they shared blood, not values. She had been asked to lie. She refused, so she was erased. I finally understood why she never spoke about her past, why she kept our life small and quiet, why she avoided family gatherings that felt harmless to me. She wasn't ashamed. She was protecting me. One entry written years later stopped me cold. If they ever come back, it will be through my child, not through me. I need to be ready for that. I closed the folder and pressed my palms flat against the table. She knew they would wait, that they would smile at funerals, offer help, pretend concern, and that eventually, curiosity or necessity would bring me to this door. In another folder, I found copies of legal documents, not accusations, evidence. My mother had never intended to destroy anyone. She had intended to defend one person, me. There were notes about timing, about how grief makes people vulnerable, about how family pressure feels heavier when you're alone. She wrote about me with tenderness that made my throat ache. She is strong, but she doesn't know it yet. If this ever reaches her, it means I'm gone, and I hope she understands that silence was never meant to hurt her. I sat there for hours, reading, understanding, grieving the woman I thought I knew, and meeting the woman she really was. When I finally left the property, the sky had darkened. As I locked the door behind me, my phone rang. It was my aunt. Her voice was tight. "You shouldn't be there," she said. "That place causes trouble." "I know," I replied quietly. "That's why Mom kept it." There was a long pause. "You don't know what you're dealing with," she warned. I did. That was the problem. "They'll turn on you," she continued. "They always do." I thought of my mother, sitting alone years ago, making the same choice. "I'm not her," I said, "but I understand her now." I hung up before she could respond. That night, another message came in, from the lawyer, a formal request to discuss shared interests. I deleted it, because the truth was no longer fragile. It was solid, documented, waiting. My mother hadn't hidden a shameful secret. She had hidden a weapon, not one meant to hurt, one meant to end something. And now it was no longer hers to carry. The pressure didn't come all at once. It arrived carefully, politely, like it had been rehearsed for years. First, it was phone calls, asking how I was really holding up. Then, it became suggestions about what my mother would have wanted. Finally, it turned into meetings I never agreed to attend. They called it a family discussion. I called it what it was, a test. We met at my aunt's house on a Sunday afternoon, the same living room where I'd spent childhood holidays, pretending not to hear arguments behind closed doors. Everyone smiled when I walked in. Too much. My cousin offered coffee. My aunt asked if I was sleeping enough. Someone touched my arm in a way meant to feel supportive. Then the conversation shifted. "You know the property is becoming a burden," my cousin said, gently. "Maintenance, taxes, legal complications." Another relative nodded. "We're just trying to help you avoid stress." I listened without interrupting, because my mother had taught me something important in her notes. People reveal their intentions when they think you're overwhelmed. "You don't have to do this alone," my aunt added. "We're family." That word hung in the air longer than it should have. Family. I asked a simple question. If this place is such a burden, I said, why does everyone suddenly care so much about it? Silence. Then someone laughed nervously. "It's not about the place," they said. "It's about fairness." Fairness. The same word used to excuse so many things my mother had written about. That's when the papers came out. A proposal. Clean. Professional. Already signed by everyone except me. They wanted me to sell quickly, quietly. The proceeds would be shared appropriately. I didn't need to read the details to know exactly who decided what was appropriate. As I scanned the document anyway, my chest tightened. My name was listed as beneficiary, but not decision maker. They'd already planned a future where I stepped aside. I looked up and realized something worse. One person wasn't meeting my eyes. My younger cousin, the one I trusted, the one who'd texted me late at night, asking if I was okay. He avoided my gaze, and suddenly, everything made sense. My mother hadn't just predicted who would come for me. She'd predicted who would crack first. I pushed the papers back across the table. "No," I said simply. The word landed harder than I expected. The room shifted. Smiles faded. Voices sharpened. "You're being emotional," someone said. "This isn't the time to make rash decisions." I thought of my mother accused of the same thing years ago for refusing to lie. "I'm not emotional," I replied. "I'm informed." That's when the tone changed completely. Warnings replaced concern. "You don't want to drag this out. Legal battles get ugly. You could lose everything." I stood up slowly. "I already know what losing everything looks like," I said. My mother lived it, and she survived. They stared at me now, not as family, as a problem. The meeting ended abruptly. No hugs, no polite goodbyes, just tension. That night, my younger cousin called me, crying. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. "They said it was better this way." I believed him. That was the tragedy of it. People don't betray you because they're evil. They betray you because they're afraid. I didn't comfort him. I didn't yell. I told him the truth. "You chose comfort over conscience," I said. "And now you have to live with that." When I hung up, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Clarity. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to finish what my mother had refused to let happen. But my mother had prepared for this. In the final folder I hadn't opened yet, there was a single note. "If they push, don't argue. Don't explain. Just let them know you understand." Understand what? I understood that the family I thought I had was built on silence, and that silence only benefits the people who created it. The betrayal hurt, but it also freed me, because now I knew exactly who I was dealing with, and I was done being polite. As someone who has spent years studying family trauma and generational behavior, I can tell you this with certainty. The most dangerous secrets are not the ones that shock us. They are the ones meant to protect us. Parents don't hide truths because they are weak. They hide them because they understand something their children often don't yet see. That some knowledge doesn't bring peace, it brings exposure. This mother didn't stay silent out of shame. She stayed silent out of strategy. She recognized a pattern in her family, a pattern where loyalty was demanded, not earned, where silence was rewarded, and truth was punished. So she made a different choice. She didn't fight loudly. She didn't burn bridges. She stepped away. She documented everything. And she trusted that one day her child would be strong enough to decide what to do with the truth. That is not cowardice. That is wisdom. What we see here is something many families never confront. The idea that blood alone does not make someone safe or deserving of access to your life, your peace, or your future. Healing does not always look like reconciliation. Sometimes healing looks like clarity, like boundaries, like saying, "This ends with me." And perhaps the most powerful part of this story is that there was no loud revenge, no public destruction, no screaming matches, just a quiet refusal to repeat the past. That is how cycles are broken. If this story made you reflect on your own family, your own boundaries, or the things you were never told, take a moment to acknowledge that. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories told slowly, honestly, and without spectacle, I invite you to support the channel. A simple like helps these stories reach others who may need them, and subscribing ensures you don't lose them when life pulls you away. Before we end, I'll leave you with one final question. Not every door is locked to keep us out. Some are locked to keep us safe, until we're ready to choose what comes next. Thank you for listening.